Well, hello, everybody. My name is Quentin Palfrey, and I'm the chair of the Voter Protection Corps. Really excited to be with you here today as we get going. A little bit of housekeeping. So we'll be taking questions through the chat function throughout the webinar. So if you have questions for any of the speakers, please feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to say in the chat who you are and what your interests are and your experience. We have a great program for you here today. I'll set the stage a little bit up front, and then we've got four terrific speakers for you. We'll start out with a little bit of scene setting from Virginia, which is the battleground state of 2025 that we're very focused on concretely. Voting is underway soon, or underway for the primary already. And very important as a concrete voter protection opportunity right away. We have old friend Raid Ghani, who's been a real leader in data science for social good, and also spent a lot of time thinking about the digital landscape in elections. We have Annabelle Gardner from Spitfire Strategies, and Jesse Littlewood from the Voter Protection Corps. So I just want to introduce you, before we get started, introduce you a little bit to the Voter Protection Corps. So the Voter Protection Corps is a network of experts in voter protection, many of us going back in this space more than 20 years. And we came together around the idea that we ought to be focusing year-round on voter protection issues, that often many of the challenges that voters face in registering, voting, and having their votes count are best addressed early on. We every cycle recruit, train, and deploy an army of volunteers who go to polling places, and that's a really key strategy for our voter protection activities. But voter protection is a year-round kind of effort, and the Voter Protection Corps is focused on really using effective strategies at every point in the cycle to help voters register, vote, and have their votes count. Voter Protection Corps, at least in this form, is a 501c3 organization, and we are really excited to talk to you today. So I want to give you just a little bit of context on Virginia and why Virginia is so front and center for us right now. We are, voter protection challenges are as old as our democracy. I like to tell people that the first presidential election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson was quite dirty, and making sure that elections are free and fair is something that we as a country have contended with since our very early days. That said, our democracy is facing a set of challenges that are really unprecedented. The rule of law is under attack. And the 2025 elections are really the first test in the second Trump administration, the first test after some of the executive orders, some of the attacks on our constitutional order that we've seen from this administration. And it's really important that we make sure that we make every effort to make these elections free and fair. Virginia is really the biggest of the 2025 elections, and I think that it is important in its own right. It is also a really important test case as a canary in the coal mine to see the kinds of strategies that are likely to come up in terms of voter suppression and some of the things that we can do to combat them. So in Virginia, we have a gubernatorial race, we have a full General Assembly on the ballot, we have a number of really important questions in front of us in terms of a recent history of anti-voter policies, voter roll purges, attempts to roll back same-day registration. And so some of the traditional voter protection challenges are very much in front of us right now. At the same time, we're also, and Voter Protection Corps has been focused on some of the new digital challenges to voter protection. We've seen our elections more and more. The conversations around voting in elections happen more and more online. And some of the challenges in terms of making sure that voters have good access to accurate information, a lot of that has evolved into the digital landscape. So one of the things that we want to spend some time with you here today is hearing from some experts, both on some of these new threats and challenges, and also importantly, some of the key strategies that have worked in recent elections that we think are best practices in how to think about how to respond to a digital ecosystem that is increasingly challenging for voters. So with that, what I'd love to do is turn the mic over to our first speaker. And we're really pleased to have with us here today Miles Kelekian from the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. This is really at the center of the C3 voter protection efforts in Virginia, and would love to give Miles an opportunity to really sort of set the table in terms of the Virginia election before we get into some of the digital challenges. Miles?
Great. Thanks so much, Quentin. And want to thank you for all the amazing work that Voter Protection Corps is doing, in a time where there are seemingly countless new threats to the right to vote. VPC's work really is so crucial, and want to thank you for everything you and your team do and for inviting us in on this conversation, and appreciate everyone else for joining us here this evening from wherever you're tuning in from. It's exciting to see so many people engaged early and recognizing that we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I know many of you have years worth of voter protection experience, maybe some in Virginia, which we'll talk about in a sec. So just want to thank you guys all for your commitment, for staying in the fight through countless challenges and ups and downs. As Quentin mentioned, my name is Miles Kelekian. I am the Election Protection Manager for the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. We're a C3 nonprofit hub for organizations all across the Commonwealth. We chair the Virginia Election Protection Coalition, which is a group of local, state, and national C3 organizations, all working together to ensure that voters have an equal opportunity to participate in our elections. And the coalition's the largest nonprofit voter protection operation in Virginia. So we've got a deep range of experience, of expertise, and perspective around this work. So don't want to take too long here yabbering on about Virginia, but I think it's impossible to talk about voter protection in 2025 without talking about Virginia. As Quinn was mentioning, we have a number of very high-profile elections this fall with an open gubernatorial seat, a House of Delegates with a one-seat difference that can shape policy all around voting, and a number of critical executive offices that play key roles in voting rights, including the state attorney general. So I think the most pressing point here to touch on is that gubernatorial race, because as some of you may know, in Virginia, the governor appoints members to the State Board of Elections and the Commissioner of Elections. Obviously, that ends up trickling down to the local level with county and city electoral boards who actually administer the elections and appoint the local registrar. So what we see is really the fabric of how elections are administered and the voting process in Virginia be completely top of mind this year with these races that are on the ballot. And that's exactly why the Virginia Election Protection Coalition is building up our efforts and preparing a big program over the next few months to ensure that voters can cast a ballot and have that ballot counted. Now, we've seen our fair share of threats to both of those things. As the former capital of the Confederacy, Virginia has a long history of voter suppression and disenfranchisement, some tactics of which still exist today, particularly around restoration of rights. Some of you may know that Virginia is one of only 2 states that bans anyone convicted of a felony from voting, even after they complete their sentence, unless they individually petition the governor and get approval to vote. In each of the past 3 years, we've seen the total number of restorations decline and the overall number of restorations has been drastically lower than years and decades prior. So that's a little bit of the negative. Now, on the flip side, there has been a lot of progress around voting rights in Virginia. We now have same-day registration, no excuse needed for mail and absentee voting, and a whole lot more of good policy changes that have taken place. So I think what we see is that Virginia is really at the front lines with a strong voting rights movement, but that's in effect made a lot of bad actors and people who want to restrict voting all the more serious. So in recent elections, we've seen everything from disguised mass voter purges, kicking thousands of people off the rolls, to last second polling place changes causing confusion amongst voters. So we really got our work cut out for us this fall. But Virginia Election Protection Coalition is very much ready for the coming months and for 2025. The only way we can do that is really with the support of passionate advocates like the folks who are here on this call, folks who are excited about voter protection work in May of 2025. We run a large on-the-ground program that's everything from voter advocates who are stationed at polling places during voting. We have a sign team that deploys information on the voter resource hotline, which is the 866 Our Vote number. It's operated by the Lawyers Committee. And then we have a legal advocate program with folks who are trained to collect sworn declarations, just in case there's any issues at the polls. So when I'm done, I'm going to drop a link here in the chat that'll let folks who are interested in volunteering enter their information. Anyone who wants to join the efforts, feel free to circulate that too. Just a way to stay clued in on opportunities over the coming months and ways to get engaged with the Election Protection Coalition as we gear up for the fall. And I should note that early voting has already started for the June 17th primary. Voters in Virginia are casting their ballots, so the process is underway. Now is really the time to start getting engaged. So appreciate everyone for your interest, for all the work that you've done, for being passionate about this stuff. And with that, I will kick it over back to Quentin, and appreciate everyone for letting me ramble about Virginia for a little bit. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Miles. And we'll have an opportunity in the Q&A if folks have Virginia-specific questions. We definitely want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask them to Miles. I wanted to turn over the floor to Raid Ghani, distinguished professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Raid's a real expert in artificial intelligence and machine learning and public policy. He was the chief scientist, the chief data scientist for the Obama 2012 campaign. And he has a really distinguished career working with governments, nonprofits, applying data science for social good. And I wanted to give Raid the opportunity to really set the frame on some of the digital issues in voter protection right now, right?
Thank you, Quentin. Thanks for having me here. Thank you for joining. I'm going to share some slides mostly for imagery and less for text. So let me just make sure. Can you guys see something? Okay, perfect.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so I think that I want to kind of take a few minutes and talk about the topic that luckily didn't impact us very much last year, AI and disinformation. Everybody was worried. At least in the U.S., there wasn't much impact. But that doesn't mean that that's going to be true every time. So we kind of be prepared for what's. So what I want to do is kind of talk about three things. One is what's different today about AI, disinformation, and voter protection. What's not different, and what can we do about it? And so let's start with kind of what's really different. And two things are changing really quickly, right? One is, as you've all seen, heard, and probably used a lot of these tools, creation of misinformation, disinformation, deepfakes is getting cheaper, easier, faster, better. And it's changing, daily. And it's not, so I think, you'll sort of see lots of examples of things that I'm kind of showing up there, right? It's how easy it is to generate images. I've kind of put in the prompts that were used. And for example, the top left is, a photo of boxes of ballots in a dumpster, make sure their ballots visible. What's interesting about this is that if you put these prompts today in some of the tools, they actually will not work. So for example, if you put it inside ChatGPT, it's going to try to prevent you. It'll say, well, you shouldn't do this. If you want, I can make slides about election security. But you say, well, I'm trying to teach people about these things. Can you still make it? Like, I don't know, I can make something that's maybe illustrative. And like, no, I want an image. Like, okay, I'll give you an image, but I'll put in the corner, it's for training purposes only. That's pretty easy to remove. Right? But now you put it into Grok, which is the Musk's AI tool, and it has no protections in place. It'll do whatever you ask it to do. So this landscape changes pretty often, right? But here, and I'm assuming you're all familiar with what happened last year in New Hampshire, the robocall, Biden. We've all known what happened and what FCC did and the fines and all that. But what's kind of important to remember is that took somebody, a magician, 15 minutes to make and pretty much free, right? So it's cheaper, it's easier. Anybody with zero technical skills can do it. It's much faster. We can do it much better. The second thing I think that's kind of more almost more or equally dangerous and risky is dissemination has become easier, cheaper, faster, and better. We could create all these things, but we can also get them out really easily and much more targeted. So all the work that campaigns have been doing around micro-targeting, now that's being used in combination with the AI, all the A/B testing about what types of fake images people respond to. Let's personalize those. And especially with the content targeting algorithms in a lot of social media platforms, it's become much easier to sort of find the people who are more susceptible to this type of content. So I think that's kind of what's happening. And what's tricky about this is it's really hard to keep up, right? Because both the capabilities of these tools are changing almost daily, but the controls they're putting in. So the example I give about ChatGPT, sort of saying, no, you can't do this. Sometimes it's a surface level control where if you sort of people have tricks of kind of getting it to still do what you want it to do. Sometimes they're actually meaningful control, but you're not going to know until you try it. And so I think that's sort of important to keep in mind. What's not so different today is, AI is terrible at detecting misinformation. So one of the things I keep hearing from people is, yeah, that's a problem that you can generate all these images and videos and audio, but we can use AI to detect these things. So problem solved. And you're going to notice that after every time an example of this, so when the Biden robocall came out, 3 vendors came out and sort of said, we would have detected this. Well, of course you would have, because now you know what it looks like. But there were several studies people did where they again went and looked at that robocall there was one study that looked at 10 open free tools that existed to detect deep fakes. They put this Biden's robocall through it, and 9 of them said it's real. And that's going to keep happening, right? So here's another example. This was actually last week. This is in France. This image was put out on Twitter X. And right away, a lot of people sort of came in and sort of said, this is not real, this is fake. All the different tools basically detected this as fake. And people started giving reasons for why it's fake. And here was the number one reason, like top 5, 10 reasons is, oh, well, AI tools are really bad at detail. So sometimes they'll put 6 fingers in a hand or 3 fingers. And so in this case, you see the front person, only 3 fingers visible. And in the back, there are 2 hands, interlocked together. And it turns out that this is actually a real image. It's not fake. But when you run it against these tools, right, it says definitely AI generated, except when you change the brightness and the lighting, which pretty much every image editing software, not even sort of deepfake software, just Photoshop, right? If you change lighting, it says, no, it's fine now, right? So these tools are pretty terrible today to detect any type of fake images or fake audio or fake video. And the people building or generating this content, know that. So they often sort of, add a little bit of one of the things in the robocall was there was sort of static in the background. And that static kind of makes these tools, it distracts them, right? So they can't really detect these type of things. So these tools are pretty terrible today. And like, here's another example, by the way, of how terrible they are. This was, again, 2 years ago. There was, again, a tweet that said, Pentagon, there's a fire or the bombing at Pentagon. Here's an image with smoke. And there was sort of stock market impact. And very quickly people started talking about, it's a fake image. And they started giving all these examples. What's sort of interesting about this is if you use a lot of these tools that are deepfake detectors, the left is the original image. Most of them said, yeah, it's actually a fake image. You crop out a piece of it and you say, what about this one? Like, oh no, that's good. And so the point of what I'm trying to say, don't expect any of these tools to be useful, especially for sort of rapid response type things or automated monitoring things. You can't sort of rely on them to do to detect things because people are also bad at it. Just by looking at an image or a piece of audio or a video without context, it's almost impossible in many cases for humans and also machines to detect it. Where AI is really useful is where it's been traditionally useful, which is sort of monitoring at scale, like the listening piece, the social media listening. Like, what images are coming up? What are people sharing more? What's new? Where is it coming from? Summarizing that, all of that monitoring is kind of the best use case for AI today in from the voter protection side, and not detection and mitigation, right? So that's kind of so what can we do, right? One is what we've always done in anything like this around monitoring, right? We monitor, we develop tools for trying to figure out what's happening in the world, and then we train our teams to sort of detect these types of things and how to respond quickly, right? It becomes and Annabelle is going to talk more about what do we do there. Two, easier said than done, right? Educate people to be critical consumers of information that seems suspicious. And it's easier said than done because, that's the right thing to do. It's just really hard and really expensive to do. Especially when a lot of these tools are designed to reinforce what people kind of already want to believe. And that's where some of the targeting comes in, right? So teaching them to question things if it looks suspicious, or check reliable sources, verify. I think we need a lot more tools around it where the burden is not on people, but the burden is, kind of on the content providers, sort of but those are not there today, right? It's not in their best interest if they start giving caveats. Three is, I think, as I said, these tools are terrible at detection, but luckily a lot of the AI generation tools also have sort of these telltale signs. As I mentioned, like they're bad at details and they're bad at connecting pieces together in one piece of content, right? So they'll sometimes put 5 or 6 fingers for a person. Sometimes when you zoom into the skin tone looks weird. It's like too smooth. Or sometimes they'll put in shadows that are, you've sort of seen images where the shadows are off. But that requires a lot of sort of like looking, zooming in, and it's not trivial. But if you know what you're looking for, which is, again, we can't expect every voter and citizen to sort of be able to do that, but our kind of response teams can do that, right? If we're sort of seeing certain things being shared a lot or showing up, we can start trying to figure out what does the rapid response message look like? Is it just denying it, or denying it with explanation? Say, look, this is fake because look at this, look at this, look at this, and that's going to have more power. Yeah, and I think kind of training people to recognize some of these things when they see something suspicious that looks too good to be true, or too simple, too straightforward, kind of just say something, and Jesse's going to kind of share some sort of website where you can sort of share some of these things, so we can kind of consolidate and provide things back. So that's kind of what I had. And the takeaway, the three things I want to sort of remind people, right, is yes, AI, among many other powerful uses, it is also a tool for very cheaply generating, luckily, realistic-ish content. The ish is important today. It's not perfect, but it's getting really good, especially when we have sort of bad actors in the loop, right? They can look at the image and say, oh, this one's not so good. I'm going to remove it. I'm not going to send that on. And so with very little cost and expertise, it doesn't require much technical expertise. These tools that exist online, they're often free or very, very cheap. Um, and then today, so that's both, mostly, it's great news for when we're trying to use these tools for work. It's terrible news when we're trying to prevent deep fakes. And so that's kind of the current. And then these tools are today not very good at detecting, and I don't think that's going to change very soon. One of the things you're going to also hear is one way of fixing this is watermarking, which is trying to embed code into these images that a human doesn't see it, but a machine will sort of see it and say, that's fake. And that was generated by an AI tool. But that's only true. One, it's not mandatory right now. It's totally voluntary. Some tools are using it, but there are enough free open source tools out there that you can very easily bypass it. So yes, it's a step in that right direction, but it's not going to prevent anybody from creating these things. And so I think for voter protection efforts, one, we can use AI as a tool to monitoring, but then it really has to inform a lot of our traditional approaches around messaging, education, rapid response teams that we're going to have to do. So I'll stop for now and back to Quentin to go to the next speaker.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Raid. I really appreciate it. And I want to build a little bit on the what can we do piece. And for that, I'd love to introduce Annabelle Gardner, who's the Vice President of Spitfire Strategies. She's a communications expert who has led the firm's efforts to monitor and analyze and respond to mis and disinformation, particularly where that aims to disenfranchise voters. And she's worked closely with groups like the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, as well as Common Cause. And we're delighted to have Annabelle with us today.
Yeah, hi folks. Really excited to be here. Thank you so much for including me in this conversation. As Quentin just said, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, okay, but seeing your presenter version.
Oh, well, that's not right. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
Thank you, Jesse. Giving away the magic. Sorry about that. So I am a vice president at Spitfire Strategies, as Quentin just said, and I have been a communication strategy nerd for the last 15 years. And I help nonprofits and foundations to spark change. And about 5 years ago, I got to meet actually Jesse when he was at Common Cause and partnered really closely with Leadership Conference as well to support organizations in the voter rights space to counter mis and disinformation that was targeting voters. So I'm really excited to sort of talk you through some of the things we think about when we think about how to combat this stuff, especially as communicators, whether that's communicators for organizations or just voters who care about this work, election protection folks, and share some of the insights we've learned over the years and get your questions afterwards. So one really quick thing that I think is helpful to just make sure that we're being clear about what we're talking about here is the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And often they are used interchangeably. And of course, both of them are harmful, but it is really important to actually understand the difference between the two, both in how we respond to it, but also how we think about our role in inadvertently amplifying disinformation. So the thing to remember is misinformation starts with M and it is for mistake. So that is something that people spread by mistake because they think it is true. They're concerned about getting the information to their friends and family, neighbors, colleagues. And so they share something that is in fact untrue and thus are amplifying it to new audiences. We see this all the time on social media. or on text threads, closed threads, Nextdoor, all the different kinds of channels that we engage with each other, there's lots of opportunity for us to inadvertently share information that is not true. Disinformation is D for deliberate. So disinformation is spread deliberately to breed distrust in our institutions for all different types of reasons that I'll talk about here in a second. It is really meant to sow chaos, spread lies, and often the thing to know about it is that disinformation can often become misinformation. So here's an example from a voting rights context where you see the disinformation example on the left and how that turns into misinformation here on the right. So the disinformation is you have a group of white supremacists are organizing on Truth Social to create fake social media accounts on Twitter, posing as Black voters from a majority Black district. Their intent is to suppress Black voter turnout. So through the fake social media accounts, they falsely claim their polling place was closed unexpectedly. And this is the kind of disinformation that we see every election cycle, and try to work with our local partners and community members to push back on when we see this disinformation. But you can imagine how if you are a neighbor in that voting district and you see posts about your polling place being closed, you might inadvertently share this to warn your family and friends that your polling place is closed, and thus you are sharing that false message, right? So the reason I share this is because, one, like I said, it's really important that we understand and name the motivations behind spreading this stuff, because that is actually one of the ways that we can debunk it when we see it. The other reason it's really important is because we all, whether or not we want to, have a role that we can inadvertently play in amplifying disinformation to our neighbors, to our family, to our friends. And so, as the other speakers have already said, part of the best way that we can fight this is to actually slow down, take a beat, especially if something is giving you like a strong emotional reaction, because that is what disinformation is meant to do. And that's part of why it spreads so fast, is to take that beat, check your sources, and then post if you can confirm that it is true. So the other thing that's really important to understand about disinformation is, of course, it impacts all sorts of different issues that I work on, that many of us care about, from climate change to vaccines to voting. But we can't deny that it disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. And they are designed to do that, right? So they are designed to promote existing structures that marginalize communities from different identities, whether that's white supremacy or the patriarchy or other harmful ideologies that harm individuals and communities based on their myriad identities. And it's really important, especially as we think about how this intersects with our democracy, that we understand this reality and that we're thinking about that as we're developing strategies for countering it. So this is actually an example or a photo from a congressional hearing that it's Miss Moss and Miss Freeman in Georgia, who were election workers in the state of Georgia in 2020. And they were targets of Trump and his allies' false information about tampering with ballots. And, I think the important part here is sometimes we think about disinformation just as like an online phenomena, but the reality is it has like very significant and harmful impacts in real people's lives. So these two women who were just doing their job suddenly were getting death threats. They were being harassed online just for carrying out their duties as election workers. And I don't say this to scare folks away from becoming election workers. I say this to just make sure that we're all really, really clear on what we're up against so that we can fight it in strategic and thoughtful ways. And so, as I said before, disinformation is spread for different reasons. This is, of course, not an exhaustive list, but the majority of times, these are the main sort of goals behind why people spread this stuff. And as I said before, the reason why it's important for us to understand why people spread this is because part of how we counter disinformation is by naming the motivations behind it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into messaging. But the main sort of goal here is to sow chaos and breed distrust. And it really is designed to overwhelm our ability to decipher the truth. So just as Raid was talking about how it is hard for AI to identify some of this stuff, it's also very hard for humans to identify this stuff. And in part, that's because we're just getting hit with so much information constantly that we're moving really quickly. We're not taking the same amount of time to double check our sources. Things like that makes it much harder to decipher truth from fiction. And that's part of how they're so successful. So whether it's political goals like drumming up support for a particular war, or ideological goals, like I said, maintaining white supremacy or other ideologies that keep some people out, financial goals, we saw this related to like selling fake remedies for the coronavirus, or all three of these things at once. So they're not mutually exclusive. So we saw a lot of targeting of women candidates, and especially this is happening to a lot of women of color, which we saw with Kamala Harris both times she was running. But also at the same time, it's meant to maintain white supremacy while discouraging other women in the future from running for office. So one of the most important tools, I would say, both for any type of communication strategy for social change, but also specifically in how we counter mis and disinformation, is to understand how it shows up among our audiences and who we actually have the opportunity and access to reach. So one of the things we always talk about first when we're thinking about how do we respond to disinformation that we're seeing when I'm working with organizations or individuals is to actually get clear on who your audience is. Because the reality is that we are not, trusted messengers are key to how we combat disinformation. And the better we understand who we have access to and who we can persuade, the more successful we are in countering this stuff. So we usually think about audiences in three different buckets. The first are the GOTS. So these are like your organization's core supporters, or if you're thinking about this from an individual's perspective, these are like your ride or die friends, family, colleagues. Like they know about and care about and believe in the work that you do. They likely vote often. They care about being engaged and volunteering in their communities, and they will likely share accurate and factual information about the issues that you care about or the candidates that you care about, if it's a C4 project. But unfortunately, they might also preemptively share disinformation in an attempt to debunk it, which means that they really need to understand the role that they play in amplification. The other audience we think about is what we call the gettables, or sometimes people call them the persuadables. And so they are either folks that maybe don't know enough about voting or don't know enough about the rules in Virginia, let's say, and haven't yet been persuaded to care. So maybe they've voted in the past, but they haven't showed up for a midterm election before, or something like that. Often these are the folks who are the targets that disinformation agents focus on. And they are often very susceptible to misleading information because they aren't familiar with the information to begin with, or they have a particular worldview that's just not aligned with how you talk about issues, right? So it's really, really important that when we're thinking about these gettables and persuadables that we have in our audience group, in our family, in our circle, that we're sharing accurate information with them from messengers that they deem credible, which unfortunately may not be you, right? So this is also part of where collaboration across organizations, across communities is super important so that we can be tapping in where we can actually be most helpful. And then there's the never gonnas, okay? And another way we talk about them is the opposition. So these are often people who just straight up disagree with anything that you believe. They do not share your particular worldview about what's important when it comes to voting and democracy. They may actually be the people who themselves are spreading disinformation for the intent to sow distrust, to prevent certain people from voting, to raise their own reputation and money. they range from people, like I said, that oppose your viewpoints to are actually trying to, push harmful disinformation. And we really need to be aware of these folks and the narratives that they're propping up so that we can be smart about how we respond. But generally, it is not worth your time, resources, mental health to be responding to these folks. And actually, because of how many social media platforms are created, even if you see a post that's wildly untrue and you put like a thumbs down, anger, brain, exploding emoji, unfortunately, what that's actually going to do is it's going to get in front of more people, right? So generally, we want to actually not engage with this kind of content unless we are reporting it, or which used to be something that we did a lot when it came to our partnerships with social media platforms. And unfortunately, with them, pulling back from a lot of that kind of action, we're not seeing that as an option as much. But these are the folks that we really, really, really want to sort of understand what they're going for, but avoid as far as how we think about communications. So again, as I said before, recognizing our own role in how we respond to this stuff is super, super important. One really smart researcher, Dr. Lisa Fazio at Vanderbilt University, put it this way, and I think it's really a good reminder, is that if you're prioritizing for engagement, you are not prioritizing for truth. And so especially when we're thinking about how we promote this stuff online, how we engage with folks and communities, we really, really, really have to think about how do we actually prioritize for truth to get truthful information out to people that we need, right? There's a couple fact-checking sources here that I think are really helpful. And again, these are the kinds of sources that when you see content online and you want to sort of shut down conversation that's harmful, you can point people to factual sources. But the source that you use in your fact check has to actually, again, be a credible source for your audience. So some of these are not going to work for all audiences. You have to think about who you can activate. We already said this, but like simply slowing down and scrutinizing your source can also make a huge difference in our ability to limit our role in amplification. And so as we sort of mentioned a couple times, there are different types of messaging that we can actually use that is rooted in social science that helps us to respond to disinformation when we see it, especially if we are reaching out to the right audiences. And I don't want to go too deep into this. We have a resource at justtruthguide.org that goes deeper into this for folks who are interested. But the main thing to know is that there's you have to understand before you respond where you are in the process of disinformation getting out to audiences. So one of the tools we used to use all the time was what we call inoculation. It's named just like the vaccine, where you're supposed to give someone a little bit of the disinformation so that when they see it, they are more likely to distrust it, just like our body does with a live vaccine. But the challenge here is that we're seeing less and less opportunity to get ahead of disinformation before it takes root. And so our ability to inoculate audiences against this kind of stuff has become harder. So this is an example of the kinds of things we would do back in the day when we had more opportunity, where you need to be naming specifically like what the disinformation we should expect looks like, why it is false, and then pointing people to truthful information. But I think when it comes to the current reality that we're in, the next two message types are actually sort of the bigger opportunity. The first one is what we call in-channel balancing messaging. And this is where, let's say you're looking at a thread, someone shares something that's untrue, and then you're just seeing it start to snowball. Balancing messaging is actually a tool to limit that amplification and sort of shut down the conversation by sharing factual information. So again, this is a useful tool when you're seeing stuff starting to snowball, but you have to be a credible source to the folks that you're trying to get to move on. Otherwise, it's not going to have the intended impact. And then lastly here is what we call the truth sandwich. And this is also known as debunking. And it is, I think, one of our best strategies for how we use messaging to counter disinformation when we see it. And it's really, really, really important whenever you're doing debunking messaging to keep this structure in mind, because otherwise it can actually have the opposite effect of what we want it to do, which is to actually amplify negative and harmful narratives, or someone walks away only remembering the thing we didn't want them to remember, which is the falsehood. So you start your truth sandwich with a fact, and it's super important that it's concise and sticky. So you have to be able to remember the fact, otherwise it's not going to have the impact you want it to have. Then you're going to warn your audience about the falsehood, explain why it is false. And again, it is not enough to just say something is false. Part of what helps us like poke a hole in someone's thinking is to name the motivation and why something is false. And it might not change their mind right away, but it might get them to take a beat before they share something or before they believe something in whole cloth. And then lastly is we need to reinforce the facts, which is why we call it the truth sandwich, because you're starting with the truth and ending with the truth. And then even better, if you can link out or source a factual resource that your audience trusts. And so this is just a really quick example of what this looks like. One of the things that we saw a lot back in the 2024 election was disinformation about non-citizens voting or attempting to vote in our elections. Again, this is not a new narrative. This has been around since the 1800s, and it's just like regurgitated every time there's an election to further breed distrust in the other, right? And who that is has changed over time, but continues to be a strong tactic that disinformation agents and conspiracy theorists use every time an election shows up. And so this is an example of a truth sandwich that we wrote in partnership with civil rights organizations to counter this stuff. So you'll see we state the fact up front. All voters are required to verify their citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections, and election officials in every state work to ensure voter rolls are accurate. We warn about the falsehood without repeating the like racist, hateful, horrible language that the opposition uses. So anti-immigrant politicians, media spokespeople, and conspiracy theorists are spreading false claims that voter verification laws and practices are not enough. Then we explain why that is false. They do this every election cycle to breed fear, spread hate, and alienate our immigrant friends and neighbors for their own political gain. And then we reinforce the facts. Our elections are safe and accessible. States have a variety of systems and processes to verify an individual voter's eligibility. So I know that was like a very quick overview, but we do actually have this resource that's called Just Truth, and it is a communicator's guide to combating disinformation on all sorts of different topics in a very hyper-connected world. It's on Patreon, and it has a bunch of really helpful modules if you really want to geek out about this stuff. And it also has a plethora of examples and research and resources for folks to use in your communications work. So thank you so much, and I will pass it back to Quentin.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Annabelle. I want to give folks an opportunity to put some questions in the chat. We are going to wrap up probably at 7:30. And what I'm going to do is turn it over to Jesse to give a little context and a call to action, let folks know how you can get involved. And then Jesse actually will take over the Q&A moderation. Jesse?
Thanks, Quentin. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and thank you very much for our fantastic speakers for tonight. We have a couple of bits we want to talk about places to get involved. So first of all, thanks for joining us, and this video will be recorded and sent out over a link to everyone who RSVP'd, so everyone who's here, plus folks who couldn't make it. And we'll include these links and these calls to action about places where you can learn and do more. And we'll highlight them in that email, as well as other ways of getting involved. We'll include the slides as well. We also have would love to ask folks if we can get your feedback on what to do next. So We would like to continue these ongoing conversations where we are bringing together experts in the field and important voices to help gear up for voter protection in the coming weeks and months in 2025 as well as 2026. So we've held July 9th at 6:30 p.m. as part of our next as our next webinar. It would be great to get the thoughts of everyone who is here in this webinar tonight about what should be the topic of that. And there will be ones continuing throughout the summer and into the fall, but your feedback is critical to that. So there's a poll that should be on your Zoom screen. Feel free to select which ones you'd want, as well as provide any other topics that you are particularly interested in. While that's happening, I'll also make a quick pitch for providing some of the resources in order to make sure that we are able to continue to do some of this work and grow the work that we're doing in Virginia. So if you are able to make a contribution to Voter Protection Corps, encourage you to do so. Also, to the great organizations that are doing the work on the state level, like Virginia Civic Engagement Table, would encourage you to do so as well. I'll note that one good piece of news is Voter Protection Corps just recently received a notice from a generous donor who's willing to do a match for new contributions that come in. So now is a great time to make a contribution. We'll be able to match up to $25,000, which is really fantastic and would give us a lot of resources to put even more coordination effort into the field. So there's a link, but also don't sleep on all the great work that's happening with other organizations, including the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. Miles, Michelle, great. I was going to just say, feel free to drop a link about how you can contribute to that organization as well. There's also more to learn about Voter Protection Corps on our website, and we are bringing together folks who have voter protection experience in at any level, but have been participants in voter protection to become part of our National Voter Protection Corps, which provides opportunity, like consulting and opportunities to help build the field. So with that, I'm going to end our poll. Thank you all for contributing to the results of what should be one of our next. So there's looks like a bunch of really important ideas here, including a strong support across the board for legal interventions, cybersecurity, the volunteers, the nerdy details of election administration, and then some additional topics. So thank you for that. We'll take that information and be in your inbox about what's going to be next in our voter protection work. So with that, I think I will go ahead and ask some of the questions that are both in the chat and others that have come in, directly, and invite our panelists to jump in and provide some of the answers. I'm going to start with Miles, actually. So Miles, one of the questions that has come up in the course of this conversation is about what kind of early vote challenges might show up in the primaries or in the general elections in Virginia. In particular, have you seen any interactions with ICE or DHS and voting locations, given the increasing militarization and challenges around immigrant communities in our country?
Definitely, and that's a great question. I think something that's very much top of mind, especially as voting is going on right now, where, I think our attention is in so many different places these days that, when we realize, oh, folks are actually going to the polls and casting a ballot, it's a good refocus and saying, hey, this process is going on. People are still trying to have their voice heard, trying to make sure that they can cast their ballot. It's definitely something that we are very concerned about, given what we're seeing across the country and given the actors that we're seeing really pay attention to what's going on in Virginia. As much as we're talking about the importance of Virginia and voter protection and voting rights operations, other folks and bad actors are doing the same. And I think they're looking at it as an opportunity to test out a lot of new mechanisms that they're putting in place. So I think it's definitely something we'll see in 2025 of new challenges that present themselves that are going to be piloted in Virginia that we might see, in 2026 if there's not a good response. So I think it's all the more reason that we need to be strong. We need to have folks on the ground at polling places, whether it's, volunteers and poll observers or legal advocates, folks who have a legal background, who know, okay, this is something that's going wrong, that shouldn't be happening. Having eyes and ears on the ground is really the most crucial piece of that, so that we know if something's happening, where it's going on, and what we can do to respond. I think that's all the more importance to have people on the ground and have the kind of operation that we've got.
Thanks, Miles. That was really helpful. So I think my next question that has come in, I wanted to turn over to Annabelle. It was really interesting to hear, in particular, I think, about your notes about your own supporters as a source of well-meaning misinformation. So what kind of training or engagement or information do those supporters or allies or friends need to have, and how long does that take? Is that a long process? Is it a short process? Can you talk about how to approach that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I would say, so as far as the training piece goes, I think helping people to understand where they have influence and power is part of how we build movements in general. And the same applies here when it comes to countering disinformation. So I think we have all experienced like trying to have an argument with a brick wall. It's the same concept, right? So like if we want to be effective in how we counter disinformation, we really need to understand how to have conversations with folks who we can convince, and to do it in a way where we are being open and thoughtful about that conversation. So I think part of how we help or how we help organizations to think about this is to sort of think about, where are your resources, your skills, your passions best put? And the same is true for the kinds of audiences that you can engage and persuade when it comes to disinformation. And generally, we know that, especially when you think about people who believe like particular conspiracy theorists, like part of why that stuff is so powerful and why it's hard to get someone out of the sort of spin of that is that they create this belief that everyone else is going to tell you you're wrong because they're not like us. And it's that type of thinking that makes it very hard for certain audiences and messengers to shift thinking. So we really do need to think about, how do we align and engage people across different values and ideas, and how do we use that trust that we have built to actually help people know what's true and to find the facts that they need related to voting and elections and participating in our democracy. So as far as like the training, like I said, on justtruthguide.org, we actually have a whole section on messaging and a whole section on sort of how you counter disinformation based on someone's worldview. And I think that that's a really helpful thing to take a look at. And you can, do it at your own pace. There's resources, there's messaging suggestions, there's examples across issues that I think can be really useful. And hopefully I answered the question.
That was great. I think we have time for one more, and then we'll have to wrap here. But let me ask Raid one more question, and then we'll ask for a quick closing thought from all of our speakers, if that's something we can do. Which is, Raid, I've been reading that AI agents are now indistinguishable from human beings in many ways. Does that mean that AI and AI chatbots and agents are going to be more effective spreading disinformation? And conversely, does that mean it's harder to prove that you're human to people when you are trying to give them the correct information? And is there anything that can be done about that?
Ooh, I mean, I think are AI chatbots better at disseminating, better at targeting than people? Yes. I mean, that's because that's what they're designed to do, right? Like the point, I think and that's something that, again, campaigns have been both sides have been using it for a long time. Like, so yes, I think AI bots learn and train from what people respond to. So if you don't want if you don't want something to propagate, don't engage with it, don't share it, don't click on it, don't open it. Just like fundraising emails. If you don't want more fundraising emails, stop clicking on them and unsubscribe. That's the lesson we've learned. Now, whether it's hard to whether that makes it hard to distinguish people from bots, at some level, yes, right? Because a lot of these bots, the way they are trained is they are taking human content and learning how to generate it. And so if it's done really well, especially if it's like short and in a single image, or without context, a piece of audio, it's going to become harder and harder, and it's already is pretty hard for humans to distinguish human generated versus AI generated tools. So yes, I think I don't think we can. I think the line is also very blurry when you're using Photoshop and you're correcting lighting, or if you're using Grammarly and correcting grammar and things. Now, content, facts versus not facts, that we can argue about. That is a big distinction. But I don't think we can talk about AI generated versus human generated. I think we have to talk about, as Annabelle was saying, facts versus not, or information versus wrong information, or misleading information. That's the distinction we need to make. We can't make a distinction between human versus AI because it's pointless. It's the impact of the content that matters, whether it's human generated misinformation or AI generated misinformation. It doesn't really make a difference. It has the same impact.
That's great. Thank you. All right, as we're a little bit over time, and thank you all for sticking with us, I want to give the mic over to each of our panelists for final closing words. We'll start in the order we went. So Miles, over to you, and then Raid, and Quentin at the end.
Thanks so much, Jesse, and just want to thank everyone else again for being on this call. I know it's May, and a lot of folks are probably still exhausted from all the work last election and off-year elections so far this year, but just want to thank everyone for the engagement and passion and years, I'm sure, worth of work leading up to this. Like we've talked about, the work does not stop, and there's just new and more complex and more challenging problems in the months and years ahead. So staying engaged and staying involved in this work is so crucial. I'm going to drop the link. I know Jesse sent around some great resources. I'll drop the link again for Virginia in particular, but we have a long road ahead, both in 2025 and in election cycles to come. But so much appreciate everyone's commitment to this work, and hopefully hope to see some of you guys in Virginia at the polls and volunteering and engaged on the ground there.
Thanks, Miles. Raid, any closing words?
Again, as I think, as Miles said, thank you all for engaging this early. We're the crazies, right? Who know or worried about this early. So thank you for kind of participating and then I mean, people like me who are kind of oscillating in between worlds, the AI world and then the policy world, trying to kind of encourage a lot of people to use these tools, but also caution them. The real work is really happening with you all on the ground and trying to make an impact. So thank you, and yeah, feel free to reach out if we can help in any way.
Thanks, Annabelle.
Yeah, so I would say, and Jesse's heard me say this a million times, a lot of times when we're trying to counter disinformation, it feels like we're playing a terrible game of whack-a-mole. And so I would say one of the best ways that we can push back is to get as much truthful information about voting and elections as possible. Flood the zone, your websites, your social media platforms, your conversations with friends and family, like get that truthful information out, because that is really, truly the best way that we can fight back and push and limit the harm that disinformation has on the communities that we care about.
Thanks, Annabelle. And Quentin, thank you.
So I just want to thank all of you for a terrific conversation. I want to thank those of you who joined us here today for your participation here. And I just want to say, if you are alarmed at the state of our democracy, if you are concerned about our constitutional norms, now, not later, is the time to engage in protecting our democracy. This is not something that any of us can afford to tune out or to wait until November or wait until the off-year elections in 2026. This is when we need to stand up for our democracy. And one of the best ways to do that is to help people register, vote, and have their votes count. Help in states like Virginia, where there are real active elections right now, and help on issues like countering mis and disinformation so that voters have real accurate information to make good choices about the future of our country. So now is the time to be engaged. We really appreciate you're here. We'd love for you to plug in to our work at Voter Protection Corps and in the work of our partners defending democracy. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your involvement and have a wonderful night.